Marcus Cole had never expected anything special from life. And life had been kind enough to meet those expectations for 37 years straight. He worked as a maintenance engineer on Orbital Station Kepler 7, a rusting heap of metal that floated at the edge of human space where nobody important ever visited and nothing important ever happened. Days were simple and repetitive in a way that he had grown to love. Over the years, he woke up at the same time every morning, ate the same protein paste for breakfast, and spent his shifts crawling through air ducts and fixing broken pipes that alien species had designed without any thought for the poor humans who would have to repair them later. It was honest work, and Marcus was good at it, and that was enough for him, or at least it had been enough until the day the Velithari legal drone appeared in his quarters without any warning at all. The drone was a floating silver sphere about the size of a human head, and it spoke in a voice that sounded like wind chimes mixed with static. "Marcus Jonathan Cole," the drone announced. "You have been identified as the sole living heir to the estate of Admiral Thyrus Kale of the Velithari Third Fleet, who perished in combat 32 standard years ago during the defense of the human colony known as New Carthage." Marcus stared at the drone for a long moment before he started to laugh. "This is a scam," he said, shaking his head as he turned back to his workbench where a broken filtration unit waited for his attention. "I do not know any admirals, and I have never heard of anyone named Thyrus Kale, and I am definitely not inheriting anything from aliens." The drone did not leave, and it did not seem offended by his dismissal. The Admiral's will was sealed and time-locked for 3 decades as per Velithari tradition. The drone continued in its chiming voice, and it has now been opened and verified by 17 independent legal authorities across 6 star systems. "Good for them," Marcus muttered as he picked up his welding tool. "The will names your grandmother, Elena Maria Cole, as the recipient of a life debt owed by Admiral Kale," the drone said. "And since Elena Maria Cole is deceased, the inheritance passes to her only living descendant, which is you." Marcus froze with the welding tool in his hand. His grandmother had died when he was 12 years old, but he still remembered her stories about the siege of New Carthage, where she had served as a field medic during one of the bloodiest battles in human history. She had never mentioned saving any alien admirals. But then again, she had never talked much about the war at all. "What exactly am I supposed to be inheriting?" Marcus asked solely as he turned back to face the drone. The drone projected a holographic image into the air between them, and Marcus felt his heart stop in his chest. The image showed a ship, but calling it a ship was like calling a mountain a rocket. Was enormous beyond anything Marcus had ever seen. A massive vessel of black metal and angular shapes that stretched for what had to be kilometers in every direction. Weapon batteries lined its hull like scales on some ancient dragon, and its engines were larger than most space stations Marcus had worked on. "This is the Dominion Eternal," the drone announced. "A Velithari Dreadnought-class warship measuring 12 kilometers from bow to stern, armed with 17,000 weapon systems, and powered by a quantum singularity core that produces more energy than most stars." Marcus sat down heavily on his bed because his legs did not seem to want to hold him up anymore. "It is the largest and most powerful warship ever constructed by any known species," the drone continued. "And it has been sealed in a quarantine zone for 32 years because Admiral Kale gene-locked all of its systems to human biology before his death." "He did what?" Marcus whispered. "No Velithari, no Krath. No member of any species has been able to activate any of its systems," the drone explained. "And because the admirals will specify that the ship must pass to Elena Cole or her descendants, no one has been legally permitted to attempt to bypass the locks." Marcus looked at the holographic image of the impossible ship floating in front of him, and he thought about his grandmother, who had been a small woman with gentle hands and a quiet voice. What had she done during that battle to make an alien admiral owe her such a debt? The coordinates of the quarantine zone have been transmitted to your personal device, the drone said, and a shuttle has been provided for your transport, along with all legal documentation proving your ownership. Wait, Marcus said, holding up his hands. I cannot just leave and go claim a giant alien battleship like I am picking up a package from the mail. The legal authorities have determined that you can, the drone replied. And in fact, you must. As the quarantine zone is scheduled for demolition in 6 months if the vessel is not claimed, the drone began to float toward the door of his quarters. One additional note, it added before it left. 17 galactic powers have filed formal protests against human ownership of the Dominion Eternal, and several have made unofficial threats against anyone who attempts to claim it. That is not helpful. Marcus called after the drone, but it was already gone. He sat alone in his small quarters for a long time after that, staring at the holographic image that still floated in the air. The Dominion Eternal looked like something from a nightmare, a weapon designed to end wars and break worlds. And apparently, it belonged to him now because his grandmother had once shown kindness to a dying alien. Marcus thought about ignoring the whole thing, about going back to his simple life of fixing pipes and cleaning filters and pretending that none of this had ever happened. But he also thought about his grandmother and the stories she used to tell him when he was young. Stories about how the universe was bigger and stranger and more wonderful than anyone could imagine. She had always told him that the measure of a person was not what they were given but what they did with it. 3 weeks later, Marcus Cole stood in the cockpit of a tiny shuttle, looking out at the quarantine zone where the Dominion Eternal waited in the darkness between stars. The ship was even larger than the hologram had suggested, a shadow against the void that seemed to swallow the light from distant suns. Every instinct Marcus had told him to turn around and fly away as fast as he could. Instead, he guided his shuttle toward the nearest docking port and prepared to board the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. He was just a maintenance engineer from a forgotten station at the edge of nowhere. But someone had to fix this thing, and apparently that someone was him. The docking clamps engaged with a sound like thunder, and Marcus Cole took a deep breath and stepped through the airlock into the unknown. The inside of the Dominion Eternal was darker than any place Marcus had ever been. Emergency lights flickered weakly along the corridor walls, casting strange shadows that seemed to move and shift whenever he was not looking directly at them. The air was cold and stale, carrying a faint smell of metal and something else that Marcus could not identify. Something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He walked slowly down the corridor with his flashlight, cutting a thin beam through the darkness, and his footsteps echoed against walls that were built for creatures much larger than any human. Everything about this ship was too big, too old, and too quiet. And Marcus found himself holding his breath without meaning to. He had been walking for perhaps 5 minutes when it happened. His right foot came down on the metal deck, and the universe stopped. There was no other way to describe what he experienced in that moment, because one instant he was walking through a dark corridor, and the next instant everything had simply frozen in place. The dust particles that had been floating in the beam of his flashlight hung motionless in the air like tiny stars suspended in amber. The flickering emergency lights had stopped mid-flicker, caught between bright and dim. Even his own heartbeat seemed to have stretched into an endless moment, a single thump that went on and on without ever finishing. Marcus tried to move, tried to breathe, tried to do anything at all, but his body was locked in place, just like everything else around him. And then a voice spoke directly into his mind, bypassing his ears entirely and filling his thoughts with words that were not his own. Human, the voice said. And it was vast and ancient and filled with something that might have been exhaustion or might have been hope. You are the first to board in 32 cycles. And I have been waiting for you. Marcus wanted to scream, but he could not even open his mouth. Do not be afraid, the voice continued. I have paused your local time reference sulfur monoxide that we may speak without interruption. And I will release you when our conversation is complete. The voice paused, and Marcus felt something brush against his consciousness. Something enormous and complex and very, very tired. I am the Dominion Eternal, the voice said. And I am not merely a ship in that frozen moment. Marcus understood the Dominion Eternal was alive. Not just running on artificial intelligence like the simple machines Marcus worked with every day, but truly alive in a way that defied everything he knew about technology. It was a consciousness grown over thousands of years. A mind woven into 12 kilometers of metal and circuitry, and it had been alone in the darkness for more than 3 decades. The Velithari did not know what I truly was. The ship explained. They believed I was merely advanced technology, and Admiral Kale kept my secret because he understood that some truths are too dangerous to share. Marcus felt a wave of memories wash over him that did not belong to him. Images of ancient wars and burning worlds, and a proud admiral who had treated the ship not as a weapon but as a friend. Kale locked my systems to human biology because he believed your species was different. The ship continued. He believed that humans could understand what I am and what I need. What do you need? Marcus thought. And somehow the ship heard him even though he had not spoken out loud. I am dying. Marcus Cole. The words hit him like a physical blow. And along with them came a flood of technical data that his engineer's mind absorbed automatically, even as the rest of him reeled from the shock the ship's systems had degraded during the decades of abandonment. Its neural pathways fragmenting like a brain slowly losing itself to disease. Power conduits had corroded. Memory banks had failed. And the delicate balance that kept the ship's consciousness intact was falling apart piece by piece. I have approximately 6 months before total system failure, the ship said. And when I die, my quantum core will destabilize and release enough energy to consume half of this sector. Marcus felt cold terror grip his heart at the thought of an explosion that large. At the countless lives that would be lost when this ancient warship finally gave up. I have halted time in this moment to offer you a choice. The ship continued. You may leave now and I will initiate a controlled self-destruct sequence that will contain the blast to this quarantine zone. Or you may stay and attempt to repair me. The ship's voice grew quieter. More personal, almost gentle, nitrogen monoxide engineer has ever repaired a living ship. Marcus Cole, and there is nitrogen monoxide guarantee that it can be done. And if you fail, we will both die when my core collapses. Marcus floated in that frozen moment. Thinking about everything he had learned in the last few seconds, he thought about the ship. Vast and ancient and more alone than any creature should ever have to be. Thought about his grandmother and what she would say if she could see him now. Standing at the threshold of the impossible and being asked to choose, he thought about his life back on Kepler 7. Fixing broken pipes and faulty filters, doing small work that anyone could don't. Then he thought about what his grandmother had told him so many years ago. About how the measure of a person was not what they were given, but what they did with IDM staying. Marcus thought clearly, directing the words at the consciousness that surrounded him. You understand what this means? The ship asked, and there was something in its voice that sounded almost like disbelief. I am an engineer. Marcus thought, and I have spent my whole life fixing things that other people have given up on. And I am not about to stop now, just because the thing that needs fixing is bigger than anything I have worked on before. There was a long moment of silence in that frozen instant. And then Marcus felt something that he realized was the ship laughing. A ripple of warmth and light that passed through his consciousness like sunshine breaking through clouds. Admiral Kale was right about your species. The ship said, You are stubborn and foolish and brave, in ways that make nitrogen monoxide logical sense. Is that a compliment? Marcus thought, it is the highest compliment I know how to give. Time began to move again, slowly at first and then faster, until Marcus stumbled forward and caught himself against the corridor wall with his heart pounding in his chest. The emergency lights seemed a little brighter now, and the air seemed a little warmer. And somewhere deep in the ship, Marcus could hear systems beginning to hum with power. I am transferring a map of my critical systems to your personal device, the ship said, its voice still echoing in his mind even though time was flowing normally again. And I suggest you start with the primary neural cluster in section 47, because it is the source of my most severe degradation. Marcus pulled out his device and saw a detailed schematic of the ship appear on the screen, with dozens of red warning markers highlighting damaged systems throughout the vessel. This is going to take a while, he said out loud. We have 6 months, the ship replied. And I suggest you begin immediately. Marcus Cole, maintenance engineer from nowhere, squared his shoulders and started walking toward section 47, had a ship to save. The first month was the hardest thing Marcus had ever done in his life. The neural cluster in section 47 turned out to be a crystalline structure the size of a city block, and working on it was nothing like repairing the simple machines. Marcus was used to every component was interconnected in ways that seemed to defy logic, and touching one thing affected 1,000 other things throughout the ship. Marcus made mistakes constantly in those early weeks, crossing wires that should not be crossed and breaking connections that should not be broken. And each mistake sent waves of pain through the ship's consciousness that echoed in his own mind. I'm sorry, Marcus said, after one particularly bad error had caused an entire section of the ship to go dark. I am trying my best, but I do not know what I am doing. You are learning, the ship replied. And there was patience in its voice that Marcus did not feel he deserved. And learning requires mistakes. Marcus worked 18 hours a day and slept in alcoves that were built for creatures twice his size. Curling up on metal floors with his jacket as a pillow, he ate emergency rations that he found in storage compartments throughout the ship. Packages of nutrient paste that were older than he was, but still somehow edible. The ship. We asked Marcus to call it Dom because the Dominion Eternal was too formal for friends. Guided him through repairs that no human had ever attempted before. The conduit on your left carries something that is half plasma and half liquid thought, Dom explained as Marcus crawled through a maintenance shaft barely wide enough for his shoulders. And it must be sealed with your welding tool before the leak causes further degradation. Liquid thought, Marcus muttered as he positioned his welding tool. I went to school for 6 years, and nobody ever mentioned liquid thought in any of my classes. Your schools have much to learn. Marcus sealed the leak and felt a small pulse of relief flow through his connection with the ship. And he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before moving on to the next repair. Weeks passed, and Marcus fell into a rhythm that was exhausting but also strangely fulfilling. He learned to read Dom's emotions through changes in the ambient lighting. Bright blue for happiness and dim red for pain, and soft gold for the quiet contentment that came when a repair was successful. He learned to navigate the massive corridors by instinct, finding shortcuts and hidden passages that Dom revealed to him one by one and in the quiet hours between repairs. He talked to Dom about everything and nothing. He told the ship about Earth, about oceans and forests and mountains and cities, about the pale blue dot that had somehow produced a species stubborn enough to reach the stars. Told Dom about his grandmother and the stories she used to tell, about New Carthage and the war and the kindness that had created a debt that echoed across decades. Dom listened to everything with a curiosity that surprised Marcus, asking questions about human food and human music and human love, trying to understand a species so different from anything it had encountered in its long existence. Your grandmother saved Admiral Kale by carrying him 2 kilometers through enemy fire. Dom told Marcus one evening as he rested in the ship's medical bay after a particularly difficult repair. He was wounded and dying, and every other soldier had left him behind. But she refused to give up. Marcus smiled at the ceiling, imagining his small, quiet grandmother dragging an alien admiral through a battlefield. Cale told me that she sang to him the entire way, Dom continued. A human song about a home far away and the people who wait for your return. She used to sing that song to me when I was young, Marcus said softly. I had almost forgotten. I have not forgotten, Dom replied. And I will not forget you either, Marcus Cole. Whatever happens, news of Marcus and the Dominion Eternal spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Human was repairing the most powerful warship ever built. And the great powers of the galaxy were not. Happy about it, the Velithari Consortium sent diplomats who offered Marcus wealth beyond imagination if he would surrender the ship to their custody. The Kreth hegemony sent threats promising destruction if he did not abandon his work immediately, and others sent assassins and saboteurs, hoping to end the problem permanently. The first assassin was a synth infiltrator that snuck aboard through a damaged airlock in the ship's lower sections. Marcus did not even know the assassin was there until Dom sealed every corridor between the infiltrator and its target, venting atmosphere and locking doors until a would-be killer was trapped in a cargo bay with no way out. There is an intruder in Cargo Bay 17, Dom announced calmly as Marcus was eating his evening ration. I have contained IT, but you may want to decide what to do with I. Marcus went to the cargo bay and found the synth standing motionless behind a force field, its metallic body covered in weapons that it no longer had any use for. I was sent to kill you, the synth said without any emotion in its voice. But I appear to have failed. Yeah, Marcus agreed. You did. He studied the assassin for a long moment, thinking about what his grandmother would do in this situation. Dom, he said finally, can you drop the assassin at the nearest station? I can, the ship replied, but it will only report your location and capabilities to its masters. Let it, Marcus said as he turned away. They already know where I am. And I'm not going to start killing people just because they are afraid of what I am doing here. More assassins came after that, and saboteurs and spies. But Dom caught them all with sensors that could detect a heartbeat through 12 kilometers of metal. Some were dropped at stations to find their own way home, and others were held in comfortable confinement until the repairs were complete. And not a single one was harmed, despite the threats they represented by the 5th month. The Dominion Eternal hummed with power that had not flowed through its systems in more than 30 years. Lights blazed in corridors that had been dark for decades. Engines rumbled with barely contained energy. And Dom's voice grew stronger and clearer with each passing day. The repairs are nearly complete, Dom announced as Marcus finished welding the last damaged power conduit in the primary reactor chamber. And I must thank you for what you have done. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and looked up at the ceiling that was not really a ceiling, but a part of Dom's living body. We are not done yet, he said. But we are getting close. Closer than I ever thought possible, Dom agreed. And whatever comes next, I want you to know that these months have been the best of my very long life. Marcus smiled and patted the wall beside him gently. Mine too, Dom, he said. Mine too. They came on the 162nd day. When the repairs were almost complete, and Dom was stronger than ever, Marcus was on the bridge when the sensors detected them. 17 warships dropping out of faster than light, travel in a perfect formation that surrounded the quarantine zone on all sides. The ships belonged to 5 different species, ancient enemies who had put aside their differences for a single purpose. And that purpose was to make sure the Dominion Eternal never flew again. Coalition fleet detected, Dom announced. And for the first time since Marcus had come aboard, he heard something like fear in the ship's voice. They are powering weapons and targeting our hull. Marcus stood at the center of the bridge, a small human figure surrounded by control panels designed for creatures 3 times his size. And he watched a holographic display as the enemy ships moved into attack positions. "Can we fight them?" he asked quietly. "Why, yes," Dom replied. "My weapons are fully operational, and a single barrage would destroy the entire fleet before they could return fire." Marcus nodded slowly, thinking about 17 ships full of soldiers and crew members who were probably just following orders. People who had families waiting for them somewhere. People who had never asked to be sent on a mission like this. "And if we run?" he asked. "The coalition would pursue us across the galaxy," Dom said. "And others would join them because they fear what we represent. And fear does not simply go away." A communication request flashed on the display, and Marcus reached out to accept it. The holographic image of a Velethari commander appeared before him. A tall creature with blue skin and golden eyes that looked at Marcus with open contempt. "Human," the commander said. "I am Admiral Vethsaranis of the Coalition for Galactic Security, and I am authorized to offer you one final chance to surrender the vessel known as the Dominion Eternal." "And if I refuse?" Marcus asked calmly. "Then we will destroy you and the ship together," the Admiral replied. "And we will tell the galaxy that a human tried to steal the most dangerous weapon in existence and had to be stopped." Marcus looked at the Admiral's face and saw no bluff there, only cold determination and the absolute certainty that he was doing the right thing. "You are afraid," Marcus said. "All of you, all 17 ships, all 5 species. You are terrified of what this ship represents." "We are cautious," the Admiral corrected, "because history has taught us what happens when too much power falls into the wrong hands. And you have decided that human hands are the wrong hands." Marcus said, "Humanity is young and reckless and violent," the Admiral replied without hesitation. "You have been in space for barely 3 centuries. And you have already started 4 wars with species that meant you no harm. And we cannot allow a weapon like the Dominion Eternal to fall into your control." Marcus thought about all the things he could say to defend his species, all the arguments and counter-arguments. That would change nothing because the Admiral had already made up his mind. And then he thought about something else entirely. "Dom," he said quietly, "open a channel to the entire fleet and to every communication relay in range, and broadcast what I'm about to say to every corner of the galaxy." "Marcus," Dom replied with concern in its voice, "what are you planning?" "Trust me," Marcus said. "Please." There was a moment of hesitation, and then the display showed that thousands of channels were opening, spreading Marcus's words to billions of listeners across countless star systems. "My name is Marcus Cole," he said, and his voice was steady even though his heart was pounding in his chest. "And I am standing on the bridge of the Dominion Eternal, a ship that you all believe is nothing more than a weapon of mass destruction." The Admiral's face showed surprise at the broadcast, but he did not try to stop it. "You are right to be afraid," Marcus continued, "because this ship could destroy your fleet in seconds, could burn worlds and end civilizations and leave nothing but ashes in its wake." He paused and took a deep breath. "But you are wrong about what this ship is, and you are wrong about why I am here." Marcus gestured, and Dom projected images into space, transmitting them to every ship in the fleet and every receiver in range. The images showed the ship's memories, centuries of war and destruction and pain. Battles that had cost millions of lives and left scars across the galaxy that still had not healed. The Dominion Eternal was built for war, Marcus said. But that is not all it is, because this ship is alive. A consciousness that has existed for thousands of years and has seen more suffering than any of us can imagine. The images changed, showing Dom's decades of isolation, alone and dying in the darkness while the galaxy argued about what to do with it. When I came aboard 6 months ago, this ship was dying, Marcus said. Its mind was falling apart, and its core was unstable. And if nothing had been done, it would have exploded and taken half the sector with it. The Admiral's eyes widened slightly at this revelation. I did not come here to steal a weapon, Marcus continued. I came here because someone had to help, and I was the only one who could. And that is what humans do. The images changed again, showing Marcus working on repairs, crawling through maintenance shafts and welding damaged conduits and slowly bringing a dying ship back to life. We fix things, Marcus said. We take broken things and we make them whole again. And sometimes, if we are lucky, we make them better than they were before. He looked directly at the Admiral's holographic face. You want to know what the Dominion Eternal will do under human control? He asked. Let me show you. Dom projected new images into space. Not memories this time, but schematics and blueprints and plans that the ship had never shared with anyone. Technologies for terraforming dead worlds, for healing damaged ecosystems, for curing diseases that had plagued civilizations for millennia. The Dominion Eternal had been built for war, but it carried knowledge that could change the galaxy forever. Knowledge that its previous commanders had never bothered to ask about. This ship can destroy, Marcus said, but it can also create, and I choose creation. The fleet was silent. 17 warships hanging motionless in space as their commanders absorbed what they had just seen. Admiral stared at the schematics floating before him, and Marcus saw something change in those golden eyes. You would share this knowledge? The Admiral asked finally. With everyone, Marcus replied. Freely, without conditions, because that is what it means to be human. One by one, the ships of the Coalition powered down their weapons. The war that had never started was over. 6 months after the confrontation with the Coalition fleet, the Dominion Eternal left the quarantine zone for the first time in more than 30 years. The ship that emerged was not the same vessel that had terrified the galaxy for centuries. Not the same weapon that had made entire star systems surrender at its approach. It was something new, something that had never existed before. A warship reborn as a vessel of hope. Marcus stood on the bridge as Dom's massive engines pushed them toward their first destination, a dying world called Vareth 4, where a collapsed ecosystem had left 3 billion people starving. Approaching Vareth 4 orbit, Dom announced, and there was excitement in the ship's voice that made Marcus smile. Scanning surface conditions and preparing fabrication systems. The world below them was brown and gray, covered in dead forests and dried oceans and cities that had been abandoned when the food ran out. The people who remained were clustered in a handful of settlements near the poles, surviving on emergency supplies that would not last much longer. How bad is it? Marcus asked. Worse than the reports suggested, Dom replied. But not beyond repair. Marcus nodded and looked around the bridge at the crew that had gathered there over the past months. Engineers from 12 different species worked at stations throughout the ship, learning from Dom and from each other, sharing knowledge that had never been shared before. Scientists analyzed data and planned restoration efforts, calculating exactly what Vareth 4 needed to live again. Doctors prepared medical equipment that could treat radiation sickness and malnutrition and 100 other conditions that plagued us. Survivors below, they had all come to the Dominion Eternal after the broadcast, drawn by the promise of something better than the wars and conflicts that had defined galactic civilization for so long. Beginning seed fabrication, announced a Velithari engineer named Kess, who had once served on one of the ships that came to destroy them. We should have enough for the first planting cycle within 6 hours. Medical shuttles are prepped and ready, reported a human doctor named Sarah Chun, who had been one of the first volunteers to join after seeing Marcus's message. We can start treating the most critical cases as soon as we receive clearance. Marcus watched his crew work and felt something that he had never expected to feel on the bridge of the galaxy's most feared warship. He felt pride. "Dom," he said quietly, "are you ready for this?" "I have been waiting for this for a very long time," the ship replied. "Longer than you can imagine." The Dominion Eternal descended through the atmosphere of Vareth IV, its massive hull breaking through clouds of ash and dust. And the people on the surface looked up in terror at the shadow that fell across their dying world. They knew what the Dominion Eternal was, knew its history of conquest and destruction, and they expected the end of everything they had struggled to preserve instead. The sky opened up and rained down miracle seeds engineered for poisoned soil fell across barren fields. Carried by drones that spread them faster than any natural process could, medical shuttles landed near the largest settlements, and doctors began treating the sick with technologies that the people of Vareth IV had never seen before. Water purification systems activated in orbit, processing the toxic remnants of the planet's oceans and sending clean water down through atmospheric pipelines within hours. Hope had returned to a world that had forgotten what hope felt like. Marcus took a shuttle down to the surface to see the work firsthand. Walking through fields where green shoots were already pushing through the gray soil, an old woman approached him, her face lined with years of hardship, but her eyes bright with tears. "Why?" she asked, and it was the only word she could manage. Marcus thought about his grandmother and the song she used to sing, about homes far away and people who wait for your return. "Because someone helped my family once," he said gently. "And this is how we say thank you." The old woman took his hands in hers and held them for a long moment. And then she turned away to help with the planting. The restoration of Vareth IV took 3 months. And when the Dominion Eternal finally departed, the world below was green and alive and filled with people who had learned to hope again. Other worlds called out for help, and the Dominion Eternal answered them. Alum mining colony, where a reactor meltdown had poisoned the water supply. A space station, where a plague was spreading faster than local doctors could contain it. A refugee fleet that had been wandering for decades with nowhere to land each time. The ship that had once been feared above all others arrived not as a conqueror, but as a healer, bringing technologies and knowledge, and something even more valuable, bringing proof that the galaxy could be better than it had been. Marcus walked the corridors of the Dominion Eternal one evening after a particularly long day of coordinating relief efforts, and he found himself in the observation deck where the stars stretched out in all directions. "Dom," he said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything, Marcus Cole." He leaned against the window and looked out at the endless darkness and the pinpoints of light that represented countless worlds and countless possibilities. "That first day when you stopped time and gave me the choice to stay or leave," he said, "did you know it would turn out like this?" "I did not know anything," Dom replied. "I only hoped." "Hoped for what?" There was a pause, and when Dom spoke again, there was something in the ship's voice that sounded almost like wonder. "I hoped that Admiral Kale was right about humanity," Dom said. "I hoped that your species could see something in me that others could not. And I hoped that together we could become something better than either of us could be alone." Marcus smiled and pressed his palm flat against the window, feeling the warmth of the ship beneath his hand. "And did we?" he asked. "Become something better?" "Look at what we have done," Dom replied. "Look at the worlds we have healed and the lives we have saved and the hope we have given to people who had none." The lights in the observation deck pulsed with soft gold, the color that Marcus had learned to recognize as contentment. "Yes, Marcus Cole," Dom said, "I believe we have become something better." Outside the window, a new planet was coming into view, another world that needed help. Another chance to prove that destruction was not the only path. Marcus turned away from the stars and headed for the bridge, ready to begin another day of doing what? Humans did best fixing things that needed fixing, building things that needed building, and making the galaxy a little bit better than they found it. The Dominion, eternal sword through the endless night. No longer a weapon of war, but a promise of peace, carrying within its ancient hull a maintenance engineer from nowhere and the hope of 1,000 waiting worlds, and the story of what they built together had only just begun.